Gracias, Andrés, y a todas las autoridades por su...
Thank you, Andres, and thank you for all the authorities and regarding the welcoming words. And we will have, it is Marleni, the Vice Minister. She's going to start discussing the methane mitigation outlook for the energy sector and all of their decisions regarding the commitment of climate commitment. Once again, good morning. Welcome to Peru. Presentations were interesting. So, regarding the last national inventory of greenhouse emissions, the gross emissions in Peru reached approximately 194 million tons of CO2 in equivalence. In comparison with net emissions of greenhouse emissions that took place of 40,000 approximately, Peru and our emissions represents only 0.48 of the global total, as seen in these slides that you're just looking right now. When it comes to the different sectors, we could say that the total emission of greenhouse emissions nationally for the sector that contributes the most were the use of land and the change of use of lands as well. We know that energy is 33.8%, but this is only related to transformation of energy and the use of energy as well. Therefore, when we're talking about different industry sectors, talking about the energy sector, we're estimating 62,019 kilotons of carbon dioxide and in equivalence. So the main contributors would be the transportation sector, followed by the energetic industries, manufacturing industries, among others. As you can see, 13.27 is generated from production of energy, oil, and gas, among others. Within the oil emissions.
Disculpe. Bueno.
All right, so within the oil emissions, production was estimated in 82,000 kilotons of carbon dioxide, and methane emissions were estimated in 73,000 approximately. And this was generated by fugitive emissions. I don't know if maybe you could get my slides. Thank you.
Como señalé,
So stated oil gas emissions were estimated in 82,000 kilotons of carbon dioxide. On behalf of methane emissions, we have 73,089.60 kilotons of CO2 equivalent. The main gas generated were fugitive emissions with a participation of 89.8%. So that's why if you see in this presentation, you're going to see that the energetic sector had some decisions taken on these fugitive emissions. When it comes to Peru, we have an energetic policy at the long term up to 2040 because we have the vision of having an energetic system that would satisfy the energetic demand in a reliable manner and in a continuous manner. And it also promotes sustainable development. That means that the group of these dimensions, economical, social, and we include technological innovation, considering the objectives of long-term, of having matrix that will be diversified with the use of energy that our company has, as well as the efficient use of energy in production and demand. We believe that our objective is to support energetic supply that will be competitive. The sources that we need to have need to compete with their fixed and variable cost. At the same time, we want that the energetic gaps will close and that we will have universal access of energy supply We want to improve our rural electrification network in order to contribute to improving the quality of life of all Peruvians, and we want to contribute to the development, economical development of our country. Greater efficiency in the use supply chain is going to contribute to diversifying our energetic matrix. We want to be self-sufficient in producing our energetic sources. That's why we're promoting the increase of developing our own resources. One of those would be natural gas. We are still suffering the impacts of this activity. That's why the energetic sector has the objective of minimizing environmental impact and generate a low carbon emission. That's why we are updating our environmental standards and safety standards when it comes to energy. The main role that we are having is to develop the industry of natural gas. You're going to see in the upcoming slides that our natural gas was discovered in the 1980s, and there was lots of years involved to develop this project in year 2024. This matrix and our energetic contribution was diesel generator. It was not reliable. There were lots of shutdowns. I'm sure that you all remember the times that we had in Peru, but we continue following our policies. We know that we need to evaluate and see the convenience of having energetic interconnection and strengthening the institutions. Our country is rich, as said, and we still have some resources like oil. We have prospective resources of 33 million of gallons of oils, and this is located in the north jungle of our country. Loreto has 85% of such resources. We see that we have activity of oil in the coastal region and the ocean. There's lots of activity in the coast region in order to assess and improve our commercial provision of oil. Natural gas has prospective resources of 43 trillion cubic feet. Unlike oil in the North Jungle, we have this in the South Jungle in the regions of Cusco, Puno, Madre de Dios, and in the center we also have that in Ucayali.
This is why we're designing a full strategy to be able to develop this gas. As you can see, most of our development for hydrocarbons is in the rainforest, which is why this has mandated us to have environmental legislation and practices for developing these activities which are compatible with ecosystems. The gas project Camisea has already shown how techniques and technologies can be designed which allow to mitigate the environmental effects, but especially to be able to work responsibly and under common agreement with the neighboring communities. We have hydro energy, 70 gigawatts of power, but current use is only 8.3%. Then we have solar with a potential of 937 gigawatts. Currently, only 0.08 is being used. And for wind, we also have 20 gigawatts with a current use of 5%, and geothermal at 3 gigawatts without any development yet. Though research is ongoing, you can see there's a diversity of resources, and already wind and solar are being expanded, especially in the south and the north of our country. If we see how the energy grid manifested and we look at the share of sources in our internal production of energy in the country, hydrocarbons represent 75%. However, you can see how natural gas represents 68%. Previously, if we would have seen this grid in the year 2003, all was oil, and we had little production because we needed to import it. However, natural gas has now substituted the energy generation. It now represents 42%, and for the rest we have a water-based grid and also unconventional renewable grid. This is the shift occurring due to the development of gas in the south of the country. And as for consumption, one of the sectors that is most energy demanding, and the main one, is transportation. And the fuel employed for transporting both freight and passengers is diesel, which is a fuel that we are importing. For this reason, it affects our commercial balance. Hence, our measures are also geared at this sector, transportation. Then we have industry, and then the residential sector, and then fisheries. What is the ministry's vision on the mitigation of methane emissions in the energy sector, and what actions have we been pushing? Priorities occurred by having the use of natural gas and the penetration of LNG instead of liquid hydrocarbons and timber. So we deemed convenient that natural gas should have a accelerated penetration for the generation of power in order to have greater capacity for generation, to be able to make our system more reliable, and also to substitute diesel generation. In the case of the residential sector, always substitution of fuels that are harmful to homes have been promoted, especially due to carbon monoxide, such as animal droppings and timber. So measures have been pushed for the use of LNGs. Therefore, we have a program which is a direct subsidy for the most vulnerable populations, where they are subsidized at a cost to reduce the GLP tank that is 10 kilos. Therefore, we need to use an inventory of fugitive methane emissions for the development of strategies to cut back on them. The information is a very valuable source for decision making. Regarding the production and consumption of energy in our grid, liquid hydrocarbons represent 53% of consumption and timber 10%. Natural gas still represents 21%, but has major potential to supply consumption in other sectors, such as transportation, residential, and industry, which precisely would contribute to reduce its operational cost at 20%. We point out that in the energy sector, especially regarding the production of oil and gas, fugitive emissions were those representing 80-something% of participation. In the term up to 2009, fugitive emissions were greater, as you can see in the chart, due to allowing natural gas venting. Starting 2011, prohibition of natural gas venting comes to effect for all hydrocarbon activities except for contingency cases. On the other hand, it's been verified that from the beginning of operations of Camisea gas, there is a direct relationship to the matter of the increase of greenhouse gas emissions. Supreme Decree 048, issued in 2009, which prohibited natural gas venting, had significant reductions of vented natural gas, as you can see on the chart we are showing. This decree from the year 2009 hindered venting for all hydrocarbon activities, imposing a sanction by SNMPE. This is a norm that was regulated in the law for promoting the natural gas industry. We have taken decisions which have cut back precisely on the generation of methane by fugitive emissions due to natural gas venting. Among other measures, which are not our own for the productive sector, we have discussed substitution of oil and natural gas in the transportation sector. I want to point out that in the transportation sector, there's already more than 500,000 vehicles converted to natural gas. Also, LPGs being employed, and also stations supply stations have been set up to cut back emissions for freight and passenger transport. On the other hand, also in the power sector, there's already production on mass electric-based transport. We already have an electric train that we did not have previously. This has also led to a substitution of mass transport with the use of diesel. Also, in the residential sector, there's already now more than 2.4 million homes which have natural gas nationwide. This has allowed to improve the quality of life of homes, especially by cutting back on the costs to their basket via the consumption of energy. We're always betting on the promotion of LPG in areas where network or the grid does not yet arrive to. As I said, there's a direct subsidy to vulnerable populations and common soup kitchens and social institutions so that this can happen. And in areas where there's generation of hydrocarbons, especially natural gas, these direct subsidies have a greater value in order to cut back on the cost of these fuels. I also pointed out that there has been substitution of natural gas regarding the use of diesel for power generation. We will continue promoting the use of natural gas with care and sustainable development that it merits. In sum, we must point out that in Peru has defined actions to adapt to climate change and to cut back greenhouse gas emissions. Peru considers that the use of natural gas and LPG, it should be considered to substitute other liquid fuels as a strategy to cut back greenhouse gas emissions. The provision of natural gas venting has led to cutting back significantly on fugitive emissions of methane by venting starting 2011. Since 2004, when the Camisea gas production begins, it is evident of an increase of fugitive methane emissions related to the start of production. The information contained in the fugitive emission inventory for greenhouse gases is useful for developing fugitive emission reduction strategies. I want to point out that it is a commitment from the Ministry of Energy and Mines to continue betting on the sustainable development of hydrocarbons and to promote the participation of natural gas in this transition process for power that we have entitled as fair, because we are betting on the energy resources that the country has and especially on vulnerable populations. This development we are undertaking with the goal to have a country which has energy security and that can contribute to improving the quality of life of all Peruvians. Thank you very much.
Vamos a iniciar
We are going to begin the first session for this morning. This first panel will give us a perspective on mitigating methane leaks in the energy sector in Peru. For this, we invite to the stage Tiffany Bailey from the Peruvian Society of Hydrocarbons, Berioska Quispe Estrada from the Ministry of Environment Peru, Elena Mendoza from the National Society of Mining, Oil and Energy, Jose Meza from the Ministry of Energy and Mines Peru, and Oscar Vera from Peru. Thank you. The panel will be moderated by Gastón Silva, Director of the Methane Emissions Observatory for Latin America and the Caribbean.
Bueno, muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, and apologies for the confusion and the coming back and forth. These things happen. So we will now begin our first panel. The idea of kicking off with this first panel on perspectives for methane mitigation in Peru was to be able to contextualize the whole effort that is undertaken regionally in the case of this host country. I am fortunate today to have a panel that is diverse, which groups something that is very important to us, and these are the many visions that we need to consider when it's necessary to tackle an issue as this one. We have professional associations, civil society, we have companies, the Ministry of the Environment, Ministry of Energy, presenting already. But I believe it was important to begin with this kind of vision to kick off the panels in this summit.
Déjenme introducirles a
First, allow me to present Tiffany. Tiffany is General Director of the Peruvian Hydrocarbons Society, SPH. As for her professional journey, she was the first chair for Women in Energy Peru. She's an associate of Women CEO, and also she was chair to the steering committee SPH and a member of other boards such as Walsh Peru. She was also manager of Safety and Environment and Social Affairs of Seca Innovation and chief of institutional relations at Tullow Oil Peru. She oversaw programs for smart technology acquisition for Industry 4.0 by ARPEL and certification CFA on ESG investments. She's a forest engineer from the Agrarian La Molina University with a specialization in applied finances by the University of the Pacific, with a master's in social innovation and solidarian economy by the University Salamanca, Spain. I will continue introducing Berioska Quispe. She's the General Director for Climate Change and Desertification for the Ministry of the Environment, Peru. She has more than 15 years' experience in climate policy, environmental governance, indigenous rights, and climate action. She has led strategic initiatives at the Ministry of Environment, Peru, and for example, Info Carbono, Renami, and Carbon Footprint, and represents the country as a negotiator before the CMNU since 2016. And she has training as a biologist at the San Antonio Abad National University, Cusco, with a master's on ecotourism from the National Agrarian University, La Molina. I will carry on with Jose Mesa from the Ministry of Energy and Mines, who serves as General Director for Energy Efficiency. He is Technical Secretary for the Sectorial Working or Task Force, and also in charge of leading and designing the National Energy Policy by 2050. He has experience in designing and coordinating diagnoses for the energy market nationwide and the current situation and perspective at the long term. With a doctorate on sciences with a master's on energy efficiency and electric engineer. And lastly, we have Oscar Vera, who's a chemical engineer by the National Trujillo University with a master's on global business administration and energy from the Pontifical Catholic University, Peru, with more than 30 years experience in the oil industry, having served in management and leading positions and many dependencies of the company. Currently, he serves the position of General Manager for Peru. And lastly, apologies here, we have Elena Mendoza Saldivar, who's chair of the Social and Environmental Committee and also on security for the hydrocarbon sector at the National Society of Mining, Oil and Energy, and she's also Chief of Environment at Plus Petrol, who's operating the Camisea project with more than 20 years experience leading on environmental sustainability aspects in the hydrocarbon sector. She's a chemical engineer by the National Engineering University, Peru, with a master's on energy and environment by the University. We have now finished with all introductions. I would like to present a round of questions with you, so I will sit down with you and we will kick off if you agree. Policy, precisely during the mandate of the former minister, when I was at the ministry in 2023, we first we began efforts with consultancies, and at 2024, with the new minister, we built a new task force at the ministry to assess this proposal and update following the guide of national policies that this plan is under, which is led by our strategic planning office. We now have progress on our first deliverable, which is a diagnosis of the current situation and definition of the public problem. This has been hard work at the ministry. The problem we have identified, as has already been mentioned and become trending once again, is energy security, as Peru is a developing country, and energy is the pillar on which, the stone on which the economy rests. So without energy, the economy doesn't work. And this is the raison d'etre for the Ministry of Energy and Mines, which is providing support and ongoing supply, as well as reliable and efficient for power to all sectors in the national economy. This first deliverable will be socialized. We are about to begin a socialization process, and especially to obtain validation, which is what's important. As I mentioned, there have been already 3 administrations that have gone through updating this policy, and socialization is what will provide feasibility in time to it. As we are about to change government next year, what we would like is to leave this document for it to turn into more of a government policy. So yes, and as I mentioned, what's become evident and undeniable in the reality of the region is that hydrocarbons have and will continue having a significant presence for the following years, and by 2050, it is not foreseen to eliminate them. So the energy transition process is another undeniable reality that is occurring both in the region and worldwide, and its introduction will depend much on the international situation. Peru is an economy that is relatively small. It takes prices, it has never formulated them. So as government, we need to have that very careful vision to be able to tap on the environmental, social, and economical aspects as to not affect, especially, first, the acquisition power of families, that before an increase in energy, it will be affected and the basic family basket will be cut back. It should not affect competitiveness of the companies in the private sector, which is important, and to make strategic use of our resources, as has already been mentioned by the Deputy Minister, as natural gas has opened up a transition process for many years now, since 2004, when Peru began its energy transition process first with natural gas, and then in the following years, natural gas will be the support that will provide stability to the electrical grid, for example, to introduce renewables and unconventional power that is also coming in the last years. We are building normative equations also to allow the entry of this kind of technologies in power generation, and especially what was mentioned on the strategic use of our resources, without losing sight of the environmental matter, upholding all norms and standards at the highest level internationally. Thank you. Thank you so much, Jose. I believe that you were just mentioning matters on socialization and having this policy active. And yesterday we were discussing with Tiffany precisely about the importance to strengthen the design of public policies and to look into what is needed to improve precisely the measurement and transparency in the sector. So I wanted to ask you precisely, so you can tell us from the vision of SPH, what is it that is needed to improve measurement and transparency in the sector, and for that to be linked to the strengthening of public policies.
Yes, thank you for inviting me, and thank you for sharing this space with this panel and the proposals that we all have to improve emission control or methane emission. So everything that you're not measuring, you cannot control. We will not know about it. It will not be in hand. So we need to generate instruments or measuring instruments that could be reliable, that could enable us to know what's the impact that we have, control such impact, and on top of that, we need to design public policies. For Peru, we have numbers of methane emissions. 26% of such is coming from agricultural activities. When it comes to waste, 15% of methane emissions is coming from waste management. 7% comes from energy. That 7%, we could say that most of it is composed by the oil and gas industry. We are basing public policies and solutions on such numbers. But how real are those numbers? I'm not criticizing the way that we are measuring now, but what I'm saying is that the technology is improving a lot. We have lots of organizations that are focused on measuring and having a better measuring system. And if you have a better measuring system, you could know if you have a 7, 14, 20, 70% to control. On top of that, we need to apply public policies according to that, because public policies need to be designed in an integral manner. That means all of us needs to be involved in order to develop policies that could be in agreement with our national realities or context and generate a positive impact in methane emissions without impacting quality of life or energetic safety of our country. I think that would be my comment for now. Thank you. Perfect. I'm sure that another question is going to arise from this, but we should go little by little. Another key actor in such ecosystem is Peru. So taking advantage of Oscar Vera's presence, I wanted to know if maybe he could talk about the initiatives or what's happening from a company which is actually fundamental for the ecosystem and the energetic matters coming from Peru. Good morning. Thank you for inviting me. Well, our company is focused on several activities, oil and gas. In some areas, we're still working on production and refineries. Talking about the oiled fields, we have some production. There are some systems that are not modern enough. They are inherited system. We need to modernize them. And in these systems, we try to collect gas as much as we can, because all gas emission includes methane, logically. And what we do in these fields is we re-inject it. After this oil leaves the system, oil has gas and water, and this is divided within the system, and it is taken towards a collection point in order to be re-injected or to insert it into the gas current that is being commercialized. In the refineries, we have systems for vapor collection in the tank systems. We have safety valves as well, where we could see that there's gas emissions, and all of this is going to be collected to be burned in these furnaces as fuel gases. And we have the remaining gas, which is the flares. what we try to do is to comply with the gas emissions. There's standards that have been established, and in the Talara refinery, which is completely new, all of these systems are working much better than other refineries that we are currently operating. And we are trying to modernize these old ones. And this is something relevant to mention because we know what methane has. And the other thing is the economical growth, because this is an energy source. Of course, we're going to want to optimize our costs and take advantage of all the energy as fuel gases in the furnaces and all the other devices that use such gas. The compression equipment or machinery has a particular design to minimize the possibility of leaks, because you know that leaks, little by little, are adding relevant numbers. And just hearing the numbers, we know that these numbers are meaningful, and we need to work together in order to comply with the standards and optimizing our systems in order to reduce such emissions as much as possible. Thank you, Oscar. And I believe that we all agree on the fact that this is a transversal or cross-sectional topic, and energetic matters could be identified within the ministry, but we cannot talk about policies of public policies or transference of energy without doing this in articulation with the Ministry of the Environment. And this is a complex task, but quite relevant, because if we don't work in articulation with other entities, data transparency initiatives, measurements will be complex. So, Berioska, I want to hear your vision, because they will be like the counterpart of the same coin with regards to what your ministry is providing us information. Good morning. First of all, thank you for having me here. I am glad to be here in this panel where we have been sharing this work with friends and colleagues for many, many years. And from the Ministry of the Environment, our strive is to achieve our goals by 2050. We have established a national strategy in the face of climate change going into 2050 from last year. This is our long-term strategy. This is one arising after the Agreement of Paris. And within this strategy, we have a main role of energy in adaptation and mitigation. When it comes to adaptation, everything is related to energetic safety, and when it comes to mitigation, we need to reduce the emissions coming from the different sources. Amongst these sources, we have energy, of course. In this view of achieving carbon neutrality up to 2050, we're also wanting to participate with energetic sources, for example, as gas, as a transitional energy. We know that gas is going to continue playing a main role here. When it comes to transparency, I would like to agree with Tiffany on the fact that we need to improve our NRV system, monitoring, reporting, and verification systems. For this, many of us sitting here probably are working on these monitoring, reviewing, and verification systems, which are the MRVs. And we also have continuous improvement mechanisms of having a starting point and establishing improvements for the next cycles. So the way that we are measuring things now and having the data along with the information that we have now and the national circumstances of each country, we could say that definitely this could improve throughout time. In the meantime, we could also improve coordination, information that could come from companies. Each company needs to provide the Ministry of Energy of Mines with information in order to have an MRV's indicators that could collect with a higher precision such information. Of course, we know that this has improved comparing to last year. And for the new inventory coming from 2021, we already have some improvements. We could see, for example, there's fugitive emissions, which is something that we were not measuring before. We are measuring now, and we know that there's a value. We know the percentage that these have within the emissions. And between 2020 and 2021, there was a growth of 0.88%. For many people, this could seem minor, right? Because this is less than 1%. But like Tiffany is saying, it's important to measure in order to manage, because if you don't measure, you cannot manage it. And our bet is to continue improving our information systems. We have a consolidated system from 2016, which is Infocarbono. This is an institutional tool in which different entities, including ministries, they provide information to the Ministry of Environment in order to compile all information coming from the different entities going into quality. And this is where we have the record of emitted gases. And the Ministry of Energy and Mines, basically, it's in charge of establishing all of these sources. And definitely, we believe that we need to improve our cooperation with private entities, strengthening cooperation with the companies of oil and gas through the elaboration of such reports, in which we could have detailed information on the technology that they're using at the moment. What are the operational practices that they are having, and data that is going to be measured on the field. All of that is going to be key to improve transparency and improve registry and verification of such emissions. Thank you. Yes, I believe that there's two words that we're going to hear throughout this summit, which would be data and transparency. I believe that this would guide lots of the debate, because this would be the pillar that would enable you to have this into a final legislation or law. So taking advantage of having somebody in a position as a committee and working in sustainability for many, many years, I would like to know from you, Elena, what's the progress that you have seen coming from the National Society of Mining and Oil and Energy with regards to the perspective of the hydrocarbon sector here in Peru? Well, good morning. From the National Society of Mining, Petroleum, and Energy, I would like to thank you. And I would like to tell you that this society, it's a business association with more than 30 years in the country, and it gathers 150 companies. Of those, 27 come from the hydrocarbon sector. This society has incorporated in their code of conduct a principle of mandatorily acknowledgement on the relevance of climate crisis and the contribution that each of the members of the society should have when related to mitigation and adaptation. On 2022, coming from the society, we have identified an opportunity to learn about what's happening with the hydrocarbon companies when it comes to the climate agenda. How are they aligned to the national climate agenda or many other obligations or standards? Many of the companies are in Peru, but these companies are also working internationally. So we started evaluating how many of these companies measure their carbon footprint and which standards do they use. They use the IPCC or the ISO. And the results were interesting because more than 80% had a record of carbon footprint with different levels. They have a scope 1, 2, or 3, but most of them were reaching this scope 2. We also identified what actions, what mitigation actions were there, how many, and what type were implemented. And here I can show you some numbers. We identified 40 mitigation actions that were not only related to the oil and gas processes, but these were also processes within the sustainability policies in their influence areas or other. So in this sense, the actions were contributed to the energy sector, change and use of land, residues, and industrial processes. Of course, these responded on how they were aligned with the national policy. And something that we find, and this is something interesting, was that there were 13 adaptation actions due to their own features here in Peru. In Peru, we have lots of forests, we have lots of protected areas, and we have a problem of deforestation. All of these aspects are managed as part of the sustainability coming from the hydrocarbon industry. Something that was important for this national society was presence of natural gas. 20 years ago, we could say that in 2024, we had complied with 20 years of entering natural gas in Peru. And like the ministry says, we were waiting for this to come a reality, and now we have 20 years of using this. We have been talking about the benefits of the energetic scale, the profit, energetic safety, accessibility, among others. But something that we were not measuring, and actually this arose as a dialogue with the Ministry of the Environment, was that we needed to know what was the contribution of natural gas to the country. What would have happened if the gas wouldn't be a policy or a reality for us? And we wanted to know also what's going to be the contribution up to 2030 aligned to the national determined contributions, the NDCs. And the results were interesting from 2 points of view. First of all, when it comes to reducing the greenhouse emissions, with an involvement of methane, we found that up to 2030, there will be a generation of 20% less in a comparison versus a scenario without natural gas. And these values represents 8% of the goal value going into 2030 of the NDCs. So from the health point of view, the use of natural gas has been relevant. In addition to the greenhouse emission, let's remember that the fuel that natural gas has replaced, such as coal, diesel, bunker, among others, we know that it has contributed to reduce the toxic gas emissions like nitrogen oxygen or sulfur dioxide, among others. We know that we have avoided 30 premature deaths due to pollution of such compounds, and we have established 100 million soles in savings on hospital expenses, and we have increased productivity, avoiding such diseases, and we have avoided 1,200 asthma cases as a result of the emission of such gases. So the importance of natural gas in the country represents 90% coming from Camisea, and GLP, liquefied gas, that provides gas for the vehicles is 70%. In the electrical system or grid, we could say that the other 60% is renewable, conventional renewable, and we are still having an entrance of non-conventional and renewable. So there is a prospect of the hydrocarbon sector and natural gas, as you can see. Thank you, Elena. I believe that you have summed up a bit of the importance of gas as a transition fuel, and you have gave it a different look coming from economical benefits, health benefits, environmental benefit as well. And in each of those pillars, the benefits have been calculated and measured, and it's something that we can see. To start with the second round, I would like to start with you, Oscar, and start discussing the scenarios that we had discussed with our colleagues related to the duality of MINEM and MINAM, related to the initiatives coming from different companies or societies. So what's your view of Petroperu with regards to the challenges, the next steps? How do you believe that this is going to evolve? How are you going to lead such transition from Petroperu? We know that we are living a crucial moment in order to achieve the energetic transition, in order to substitute the renewable energies. We know that this period is not going to be short. We have a long way ahead in order to have economic values for such type of energy. In our countries, we have a diversity of climates, regions, and our country is quite large. We believe that for many years we're going to still need fossil fuels. In some distant areas, it's going to be quite complicated to adequate to this substitution of energies, which is something that we all want. And along that way, what we're doing, in Talara, we built a new refinery in order to reduce environmental pollution. We wanted to have a less content of sulfur, and we wanted to adapt to the type of oil produced in our country. There's still some exploitation to be done, and we're going to have to work along that line. We have actually the arrival of important companies that are going to support us in that line. We have a lot of oil companies that want to be involved. And along that line, what we need to do is to try that all activities comply with the standards as established. We need to implement procedures to modernize and reduce the type of emissions that are influencing the global warming. And this is the business of everybody here in this sector. What I could mention is that we have started in Talara. All of these emissions are controlled, are measured, and I believe that it's helping our operations as well. We still need to work with other refineries and other fields of participation. In there, we need to promote automatization and collecting such emissions, because we know that for us, this would constitute a source for economy, because we could take advantage of the gas, and it could contribute to taking a proper use of the energy sources. Our objective or our obligation is from all of us, but we need to respect the standards as they are established. We need to include what all the regulator entities are establishing. And I believe that in Peru, nobody would do something without considering the environmental standards. And we need to comply with that. That's our consideration. Thank you, Oscar. Tiffany, I believe that these summits or these type of events look for a cooperation between the public entities and the private entities as well. These spaces help us to have exchanges moving forward in an organized way. So where do you think that we should have incentives such as a role in order to progress in the best way possible? Well, it is not easy to regulate something which is constantly evolving. In this day and a half of this summit, we're going to discuss how we're going to see technology evolving, new ways of measuring, new ways of storing, avoiding emissions that we have as well. We had an event by the end of last year, and we discussed the methane in the Peruvian industry. And one of the challenges was that, actually. How are we going to transform something into policies? How could you transform something that constantly changes? And one of the conclusions from this forum was that we needed to focus more on incentives more than a punishing systems, because if you have an incentive, it would generate a setting in which you can collaborate, you can innovate. There would be less reluctancy to change, and in this day and a half of this summit, we could demonstrate that we believe firmly about the methane emissions and that we need to control it. We are basically a quick win regards to greenhouse emissions. But right now, oil and gas is a quick win, and this is something that we need to take to heart. But in order to do that, we need policies that encourage going into such evolutions when it comes to the technologies. And I'm sure that Mario is going to say the same thing that he said in October last year. And I'm sure that this information is going to be evolved for the better. So regulating something from 6 months ago is not going to work today. We believe that it's important to be on the lookout to the changes that we could have. We need to have a system that encourages collaboration, incentivizing innovation as well, and constant change. And I believe that with that, we're going to be able to achieve our objectives. Thank you. Peru, as one of the exporters of natural gas in the region, has this double incentive, you would say. Marcelo was mentioning that we should have standards to have a gas with less emissions. We were discussing the economical benefit and technology and investment does not only comes from the punishing system, but also incentives. And just to close, Elena, I think that Jose and Berioska could give us the view from the public sector. But before going to them, maybe you have the possibility of involving several actors in the society. So what topics would you like to share in order to give a message to the audience that you would believe that it is important for us to have? Well, I would like to mention that from the National Society, there's permanent incentives for everybody involved in order to incorporate the good practices and to replicate those. In Peru, we have found companies that with the Kyoto Protocol and clean development mechanisms, they have had a validation of the projects, and they have commercialized carbon bonds. So we have identified companies that are working based on the OGMP 2.0, and this establishes a challenge of securing suitable methane measurements. The most important thing is to measure that methane is taking place through the LIDAR method. And in Peru, we don't have specific standards related to this. There's related topics to venting restrictions, but this is still new. We need to move forward in a safe, with a safe pace and adapted to the conditions of the country. And like I mentioned, we cannot lose competitivity, and we need to work in a fair method without reaching an impact for the consumer. In that sense, I believe that I would like to include everybody here to make sure and intervene in the definition of public policies that could be suitable, properly analyzed, and making sure that this will be implemented in the end. So I would say that there's lots of opportunities along that line, but of course everything needs to be imbalanced.
Thank you so much, Elena. Jose, with you I begin. I will now wrap up with you. So before handing you the floor, Berioska, today, later, we will have panels on transparency, regulation. Tomorrow I'll be discussing funding biomethane. So we have a broad agenda. Any reflection from the vision of MINAM, the ministry, with everything that you have been carrying out, that you already told about, and from what you have heard from the panelists on the importance of incentives and measurement and controlling, any message that you would like to leave with the audience? There are many messages, but if I have to pick one, I would begin by mentioning that it is important funding, climate funding, for instance, is composed by many tools, and among these tools, we do need to catalyze the participation of the private sector in order to catalyze national investments. Only public investment will not achieve cutting back on greenhouse gas emissions or to adapt to climate change. Neither will the participation of cooperation that currently is now retreating. We are all witness to the cutting back of the participation stemming from international cooperation. So for this, we need to continue thinking about better ways to participate for the private sector. From the Ministry of Environment, we have 3 tools that help us, or well, 2 already made, 1 in progress, that help us to catalyze participation from the private sector. The first is Carbon Footprint Peru that operates since 2019. We have 2,500 institutions participating in Carbon Footprint Peru at any of its 4 levels. Hydrocarbons sector is among those participating in Carbon Footprint Peru, which measures emissions, checks emissions, manages emissions, and the last level is Neutralization Plus, but it refers to manage sustainably, neutralize emissions, or disseminate in the supply chain or among investors on the need to measure Carbon Footprint Peru. And we will continue working and strengthening Carbon Footprint Peru. We hope in the future to have by participating groups, because we began with a carbon footprint that is generic to all sectors and industries. The second tool that began operating last year actually came into force this year, and this is the National Record of Mitigation Measures. Via this National Record on Mitigation Measures, we are seeking to catalyze participation from the private sector, be it in carbon markets, voluntarily, or mandatory carbon markets. Simultaneously, that there is a single transparent space where all mitigation measures are held, including national measures that make part of the contribution, because only in this manner will we be able to ensure that there's environmental integrity and that we are not cutting mitigation results twice. So within the national record of mitigation measures, we have already approved, for instance, methodologies that are linked to rice harvesting, that also relates to or links to methane emissions, and the use of energy coming from enteric fermentation. So we'll continue working on reviewing more methodologies that may be useful to continue catalyzing the participation of the private sector within the national record of mitigation measures, and that can help to attain this climate ambition that we're going after. And the third element that is still in its pilot phase is adaptation, adaptación, which is the tool that will allow to measure the climate risk that investments are exposed to. Be it any investment can be exposed to risks stemming from climate change. So this is a tool that merges the whole geospatial aspect with climate change scenarios by 2030 and 2050 to the possible adaptation strategies that may be implemented from the private sector, with a scorecard of sorts that where the adaptation strategy is selected that could be developed, and it gives them like a table on what would be the most effective strategy. It will also include an acknowledgement system such as carbon footprint Peru. We are still to define whether these will be water drops or mountains, so that they don't all feel like they don't feel remote from the fact that we can all be part of adaptación. And my last message is that we're already working on building our Index 3.0 that we'll be presenting this year before COP Brazil. And under this NDC 3.0, that of course is in line to the global stock trade on reducing methane emissions, that it has a significant role. Of course, now it is more focused on the waste sector, but if there's any input that can come from this room, it is welcome. Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Berioska. Jose, you're between us and the break. I don't want to pressure you, but you have an audience that is very anxious for coffee. If you would like to leave us some words for closing, no pressure. So one final reflection, perhaps a mea culpa as a sector, is that the energy sector in Peru has no energy plan. The energy plan is the one which articulates the policy, and it's not that there has been no capability nor attempts to do so, and thanks to Cooperación we have proposals for plans drafted from the year, well, I've been participating since 2011, precisely when there was research of NUMES, which was a plan articulating the policy 2010-2040. Unfortunately, due to change in government, it was set as a guideline, and it remained so. Then in 2014, it remained as a working plan, an energy plan 2014-2030. Then in the year 2017, there was also cooperation. Thanks to a Canadian, a planning system was introduced, and a national plan and regional plans were drafted, but which also remain as a bet. The bet that we currently have, and especially the office that I'm now in charge of, is leaving a plan implemented which articulates this new update of policies, because the plan is the one that will define where the sector will go to, and is much linked to national contributions that we can redefine or improve in the energy sector. I also had the wonderful ability to participate in the latest proposal for national contributions in the energy sector in the year 2011. It started also thanks to Cooperación, planning to climate change. It was the first time that these mitigation plans were structured. Back then, we were somewhat or pretty optimistic in the ambition, well, more like blaming ourselves. We should have focused more on the enabling conditions. That's because, as Berioska mentioned, perhaps sometimes efforts from government don't go at the pace that we would like them to. They need to be articulated to many ministries. So now, including private initiatives in the carbon market is a wonderful occasion to be able to streamline compliance to NDCs that we are proposing. This also is important. What I mentioned, the plan being articulated with planning, given that we need to analyze the energy grid as a whole, and some action that we take in one sector will have repercussions in a different one, so we need to have that global vision, and that we hope to have this policy ready for it to come into force with its plan that articulates it. That is the final reflection. Thank you. Thank you so much, Jose. Thank you so much to Tiffany, Berioska, Elena, Oscar. It's been a pleasure, and now we can indeed go out to our break.